End of the month, and time for another book review. This one a little bit less inebriated than last month when I reviewed a book about wine drinking and got a bit inebriated as I did it. I would definitely recommend reading the book, Evolution of a Wine Drinker, rather than watching the review, as it'll probably be easier to understand. I promised that I was going to be reviewing this book, Into Pawnee Starlight, as the next one. My apologies, I did not get it done. Bad book reviewer. But I will have it done by next month, I swear. I've been working really hard on Relic Worlds, trying to get the book written and working on the promotions, which leads me to what I am going to go ahead and just review instead. I was researching this book, Raiders. Here's a closer look of it, and because I am interviewing this guy. Now he doesn't exactly look like that anymore because he's my age and therefore ancient. But this is what he was like when he was about 12. It's Chris Strumpoulos and his friend Eric Zala, who's either that one there or the one dressed as Sala on the other side. I'm not quite sure which. It was written by the two of them and someone named Alan Eisenstock. They put it together because it's basically the story of Chris Strumpoulos and his friend Eric Zala, who, as kids, decided to do a shot-for-shot remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And they started when Raiders actually was being made, or not being made, while it was still in the theaters. Just after they saw it, they decided, hey, let's remake this. How hard could it be? And they were like 12 when they said that, and it ended up being, you know, just basically their whole teenage lives, they were putting this thing together. They were only together during summers, so that's the only times that they could shoot. And they didn't get done until they were in college. And in fact, they actually ended up redoing one scene just this past year, 2015. So, you know, the story stretches a very long time. And while the, you know, the movie itself is interesting because it's like, how did these kids do this, you know, and you're watching and like seeing as they put it together, what's really fascinating is seeing them grow up and hearing about this story, which they rightfully so made it into a book and into a documentary, because it's the story of them putting it together and then what happened to them afterwards. It's really extraordinary, and it makes for this book. Basically, like I said, they made the film, I mean, with all the different things, including they, what was it, when the bar burns, they used one of their basements, you know, and they had to film it twice, and lit it on fire and all that sort of thing. One of them was even lit on fire to get the shot. And so it's like all of these amazing struggles they went through to do it, then their hopes and dreams as they went to film school, then coming out here to LA and all the struggles, and then all of the heartbreaks as their friendships kind of go in and out, but they keep getting back together again as buddies, but also, you know, their own hopes and dreams kind of struggling as they have to get regular jobs and, you know, try to do everything on the side. The book in particular really captures that, not only their lives, but that whole aspect that's very much overlooked by a lot of people. A lot of people learn about the way, you know, the way like famous celebrities and all that sort of thing. Well, how'd you make it? What would you go through? Et cetera, et cetera. I don't realize that there are thousands of these stories of people like them and like me who came out here with all of these hopes and these dreams and had to struggle so much just to stay alive, just to, you know, pay the rent and eat, that it ended up being too exhausting sometimes to even be able to do what you're doing. So anyway, so the book really captures that. It's such an amazing, so I'm going to talk more about my own experiences with this sort of thing. This is going to be a little bit of a long video. If you want to just skip to the book, the link is down there. But this book really kind of affected me, so I want to talk about it and sort of my own similar experiences. But so when you're reviewing a book like this, the story is already so incredible. It really comes down to, well, how is the style of it written? You know, or what is the style of it? And that really determines, you know, whether or not you like it. And there were two things that were unique, but very, you know, it's sort of off-putting initially. It's done in present tense, and it's done in a very narrative style, meaning they actually tell like the quotes of you know, them talking back and forth, rather than saying, they talked about such and such. It actually says, so-and-so said this, which, of course, there's no way you're going to remember every single one of those conversations all the way back from, you know, 1982, 1983. And so, you know, I didn't know, you know, how much I mean, it was interesting, especially because, you know, it's kind of that same thing that Truman Capote started with In Cold Blood, where, you know, you take a true story and you novelize it. But it's trying to say this is the true story, this isn't a novel, and so I was really kind of not sure if I liked that until I got to thinking about, well, why'd they do present tense. This is something from a long time ago, even though people like me would like to believe it wasn't that long ago that we were kids. Unfortunately, yes, it was. So I was really thinking, well, why'd they do present tense of a story that is so, far past? And as I got to thinking about it, I started thinking, well, wait a minute, this is about people who make screenplays, this is about, making movies, etc. And I don't know how many of you know this, but screenplays are written present tense. And they're done in this style of saying this happened. Of course, it's narrative. You can never have, well, they talk about such and such. It actually has to say what everybody said. And I kind of was like, this is a script, or it's, even though it's a book, it's symbolically done as a script. And I don't know if that was what they intended, but I'm going to take it as that because that's, I don't know, I just started really enjoying it at that point. I started really feeling like, oh, okay, this is a creative thing. Rather than just doing what everybody else has done, they're going to do it in a slightly different way. And these guys are really creative, even though, they did a shot-for-shot remake of a movie. They're very creative and they're very innovative, and I think that's what the intention of this book was. Considering that is the idea, I really did actually like that. So, yeah, it's unique and interesting in that regard. I always try to find something constructive to criticize about it, and if I was going to, I would say sometimes it's a little bit cheesy. They use one thing, actually, one of the things that's similar to script style is there are a lot of times where they will use dramatic intonations of the way they structure it. Like, for instance, in scripts a lot of times there will be an entire paragraph dedicated to one word, and that's done as a dramatic way to really emphasize something. Or there's also a lot of times where, because producers and directors don't want to hear much from they don't really respect screenwriters very much, which is one of the reasons why a lot of movies have had problems, because the script really is what's most important, but they act like it isn't. They oftentimes don't want to hear like what the screenwriter's take would be on how it's going to look. They just give us words, dialogue and action. That's it. So if the screenwriter wants to have any input on how the thing's going to look, he has to do it subconsciously. He can't be overt about it. He can't say, have the camera wipe across them or something like that. He or she has to write something that implies, cut here. Like, for instance, they'll put a paragraph and then they'll cut to the next paragraph at a point where grammatically it's not appropriate, but they're doing it because they would like to subconsciously get in their head, yeah, cut to a new shot here, without actually saying it. And so it's styles like, there are things like this have kind of created a whole new style. And that kind of style is what's sort of reflected in this book. There are a lot of times where it'll all of a sudden just be, one word to describe something, or there'll be, the way that it's structured is a little bit different from most books, but if you read scripts and then you look at this, it's like, oh, that's kind of, seems to be what they're doing, at least symbolically to that. So that part's really cool, and I really like that. It was just a few times it was like the choices were not something I personally would prefer or anything like that. It's not really a problem with the book per se, just I'm kind of like, or they would simplify something that I'm kind of like, I think there was more there. A lot of times they'll go into the real complication of something, but every now and then it's like, yeah, I think there was something more, but yeah, you guys aren't saying, whatever. But that's really nitpicking. I mean, overall, this book really, it's definitely worth reading. It's something that really moved me. The reason I have a few copies is one of them is being given away as a prize from Relic Worlds. Another one I got from my mom because she always had to put up with me making my movies when I was a kid, using the living room. At least I never burned, set it on fire. But, I mean, like, getting all my friends over, organizing all these things, and so, I figured she could really relate to this one. And in the book, they don't ignore the parents. They don't act like the kids are adults. It talks about the way a lot of the parents are feeling about that. I think it could have done a little more in that, but overall, it's good because it it doesn't deny the fact that these are kids putting this thing together, and the parents can't be taken out of that picture. Anyway, so that's overall my review of it. Definitely worth reading, definitely worth picking up. I also see the documentary and the movie itself whenever you get a chance. Like I say, I was personally moved by this, and in fact, here's in particular why. When I was a kid, first of all, like I said, I'm their age, grew up during, having the same influences, all that sort of thing. And one thing was kind of interesting. when I was in film school, which by the way, I was a classmate of the guy who ended up sort of discovering them. Eli Roth was one of the members of my class, and it was interesting because at NYU there was very much of a sense of, you know, you have to do only independent type of films, or only, you know, you can, anything that is mainstream is a sellout, and, you know, you can't like Spielberg, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And there was sort of very much that sense, and if you liked any of those types of things, you had to kind of be closeted about it. Well, what was really cool was the commencement speaker goes up, and he says, he goes up in the beginning of his speech is, let's all face it, we were all influenced by Star Wars, or we're all here because of Star Wars. And that got this uncomfortable chuckle from everybody, because everybody was there because of Star Wars, but nobody wanted to admit it. And he just came right out and just said, you know, yes, I loved that, and I loved Raiders of the Lost Ark, and those are the reasons I became a filmmaker. Now, of course, I went on to make other types of movies, but those are what, you know, started us. And he's right. That was what got us all down this road. It was seeing the Star Destroyer fly over. It was seeing Indiana Jones and his whip. And in reading this, it kind of brought me back to a lot of those things, because I kind of forget it. I forget where a lot of my original desires to do a lot of these things, you know, came from. And I kind of look at my own life and go, maybe did I waste these 20 years trying to make it in the film industry, and, you know, what was I doing? And reading this book reminded me of that feeling of, I want to do that, looking up at this huge screen and seeing the way people were reacting, and it took me back to that moment and going, I want to do this as a little kid. And then as a teenager, making these features, and as I was reading this, it was like, oh yeah, all of those difficulties, but also the camaraderie that I would have with a lot of these friends, and the fact that cameras, not everybody had a camera like they do today. Nobody, you know, had it on their phones, so you have this unique thing, and it really defined who you were. And it took so much of my life, and my whole teenage life was spent making these things, and it was usually during the summer, and sometimes during the school years, and the people who did it with me, we shared in something that nobody else got to share in, and nobody else really completely understands. And then, of course, going to film school, and all of this hope and these dreams of what was going to happen, and how I was going to change the film industry, and how, you know, all these other people who went there were going to change the film industry, we're going to do it together, and blah, blah, blah. Then, one by one, we end up out here in Hollywood, and, you know, the struggle that happens, and, you know, you always hear about the celebrities and how they succeeded, and how what they went through and to, you know, get where they are, but people oftentimes don't hear about those of us who failed. And there are really these incredible stories, and these missed opportunities, and these, you know, difficulties that we all go through. In particular, typically, you know, you're not going to come out here and just have a job like that. Nobody's going to say, here, direct a movie. So you typically have to have, like, some kind of day job, and then on the side be trying to, like, get something going. And oftentimes you wind up at these jobs, and after 8 hours there, and, you know, your hour lunch break, your time to go there, coming back home, by the time you're done with your workday, you're just exhausted. And it's so hard to pull yourself away, write the scripts, take your meetings, etc., etc. Sometimes you do, and you wind up getting fired. I actually was fired from Activision, which, funny enough, was where these guys were working. And in one part in the book, Eric winds up making that his career, and that's kind of how he drifts out of the film industry. Chris continues to try to make it, and winds up being poor, and, you know, and struggling, and etc., etc. And I can so relate to both of those. The allure of just having a regular day job and just going, I'm not going to, you know, continue what I came here for, or I'm just going to, you know, who cares about my job? I'm going to keep doing this, and then getting fired, and then not knowing how you're going to pay the rent. It's like this constant struggle, and I dealt with it for about 20 years of my life, and I still kind of struggle with it because I still need a day job while I'm writing books, making these videos, etc., etc. But, you know, every now and then you see something that takes you back, and I can't put it into words. Even being a writer, I can't put it into words what it is. That it's just something about when we were kids. We saw that image, and we saw, you know, things from that Spielberg gave us through E.T. and The Goonies, and then, you know, Star Wars, and all of these things just gave us this feeling that we were going to be that one that created not the big blockbuster, but the thing that changed everything, that moved everybody the way that we got moved when we were, when we were young. And not only the movies themselves, but what they came out with. Like, for instance, with Star Wars, they were all both of them, and other toy companies came out with these figures, these action figures, that when we got a hold of them as kids, we didn't, I didn't take Luke and go, okay, this is Luke Skywalker, and this is Han Solo, and we're gonna recreate Star Wars. I created my own story. This is Luke Skywalker is now someone else. Han Solo was now Ryan, my friend. He made him himself. I made the fireman, myself. And we would take these buildings and put them all around in the basement, and that would be an entire town. We'd make entire towns with these buildings, and we'd have, the Millennium Falcon flies in with some of the characters, and they then have this adventure, and that was the beginning of me being a storyteller. It wasn't just watching these things that influenced me. Yes, they influenced me, but it was taking the influences from them, then taking their characters and creating my own story. And I think that's really what started this entire generation of storytellers and creators and that sort of thing. And my own story then coming up and then coming out here and having my own struggles. I so much could relate to what I was reading in Raiders, and I really thank them for writing this, because there are certain things in my own life that I forget what the feeling was, and I go, why did I think that, why did I do that? And in reading this book, I was like, that was why. It was that feeling. So anyway, so that's sort of it was a very personal thing for me. If you're of my generation and you were influenced by these things, this is so much going to be for you. And even if you're not, it's a really fun story. Yeah, I really recommend it. I'll probably have some more thoughts I'll put down in the doobly-doo, but in the meantime, check this out. I'll put the link for it and everything like that. Next month, I swear I will have the End of Pawnee Starlight. My apologies to the author and to those of you who are waiting for that. In the meantime, read more independent books, and I will see. Oh, one thing, usually I measure my weight. I did not do this that month because I'm at the same weight. I've just been sitting there writing all the time. I also saw the doctor yesterday, and I was pretty much the same weight that I was last month. So I'll be back to normal next month. But thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and read more independent books.